On the morning of January 11, 1992, a couple were driving toward a military training area located near Madison, Indiana, in the United States. Their plan was to take advantage of the early morning light to go bird hunting, but what they encountered was far from what they expected. As they drove along the road, they noticed a strange smell and saw smoke rising from an area nearby. Curiosity got the best of them, so they pulled over to investigate what they initially thought was a mannequin. However, it was not a discarded prop. What they had stumbled upon was the partially burned body of a young woman. Her body was positioned as if she had been trying to defend herself, suggesting she had endured severe mistreatment before her tragic end. Shanda Sharer was born on June 6, 1979, in Kentucky. Her parents, Stephen and Jacqueline, separated not long after her birth. Jacqueline eventually remarried, and Shanda moved with her to Louisville, where she attended St. Paul's School through the 6th grade. Shanda had a passion for sports, playing on the volleyball and softball teams, and she was also a cheerleader. In 1991, Jacqueline's second marriage ended, and they relocated to New Albany, Indiana, where Shanda enrolled at Hazelwood Middle School. However, after a few months, Jacqueline decided to transfer her to a Catholic school, Our Lady of Perpetual Help School. The decision stemmed from Jacqueline's concern over a particular friendship Shanda had developed, specifically with a girl named Melinda Lovelace. Melinda was born on October 28, 1975, in New Albany, to parents Marjorie and Larry Lovelace, who already had other children. Melinda's childhood was far from ideal. Her father, Larry, had returned from military service in Vietnam, traumatized, and began working irregularly for the Southern Railway. By 1972, he became a supervisor at the New Albany Police Department but was dismissed after only 8 months for attacking an African-American man whom he accused of having an affair with his wife. Despite the family's financial struggles, Marjorie contributed enough to maintain their lifestyle. However, Larry began to squander money on cars, motorcycles, and firearms, leaving little for his daughters. The situation deteriorated, and by 1980, they declared bankruptcy. This forced Melinda and her sisters to endure hunger and rely on relatives for food. Larry and Marjorie frequented bars, where Larry pretended to be more successful than he was, introducing Marjorie as his girlfriend and suggesting she be shared with others. This caused strain on their marriage, and after an attempted suicide by Marjorie, the couple briefly turned to religion, joining a Baptist church and giving up alcohol. However, they soon returned to their old habits, with Larry becoming more abusive. Melinda, deeply affected by these events, grew increasingly troubled. By age 9, she witnessed her mother attempting to drown herself following abuse. Larry's behavior worsened, with Melinda and her sisters often overhearing their mother's cries for help. In one violent incident in 1986, Larry beat Marjorie so severely that she ended up in the hospital. By the early 1990s, Melinda had become deeply troubled, and in 1990, at age 15, she entered into a romantic relationship with a fellow student, Amanda, a talented athlete. However, when Melinda came out as gay the following year, her mother was initially furious but eventually came to accept it. Things took a turn for the worse when Amanda became friends with a new student, Shanda Scherer. Melinda's jealousy grew, convinced that Shanda was to blame for the strain on her relationship with Amanda. Despite efforts to distance Shanda from Melinda, the tension escalated. In January 1992, Melinda began plotting her revenge, fueled by anger and resentment over Shanda's friendship with Amanda. On January 10th of that year, Lori Tackett, 17, met up with her two friends, Tony Lawrence and Hope Anna Rippey, both 15. Neither Tony nor Hope had ever met Melinda or Shanda in person, but they were aware they were going to scare Shanda that night. None of the girls felt guilty about the plan, as they were all dealing with their own personal issues. Mary Lorene Lori Tackett was born on October 5, 1974, in Madison, Indiana, to a strict Pentecostal Christian mother and a factory worker father who had a criminal record. Lori's childhood was tough. She suffered sexual abuse between the ages of 5 and 12. In May 1989, Lori's mother found out that she had been changing into jeans at school, which enraged her. Instead of discussing it calmly, her mother attempted to strangle her. This led to social workers getting involved and making unannounced visits to ensure Lori was safe. However, the relationship between Lori and her mother never improved. At one point, after learning that Hope Rippey's father had bought the girls a Ouija board, Lori's mother stormed over to their house and demanded they burn it and perform an exorcism. By that time, Lori's rebellious behavior had become evident. At 15, she developed an obsession with the occult, telling friends that she was possessed by Diana the vampire while engaging in self-harm. Desperate for help, Lori's parents admitted her to the hospital on March 19, 1991. After being prescribed antidepressants, Lori was discharged but attempted suicide only 48 hours later. She was readmitted, where she admitted to having hallucinations since childhood. She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Lori left the hospital on April 12, 1991. By September, she dropped out of school and moved in with friends. However, she eventually returned to live with her parents when they promised to buy her a car. Despite this, Lori continued to spend most of her time in New Albany with Melinda and her other friends, Hope and Tony, who shared troubled pasts. Hope Anna Rippey, born June 9, 1976 in Madison, had also endured significant hardship. Her parents divorced in February 1984, and she moved to Michigan with her mother and other relatives, experiencing numerous difficult situations. When her parents reconciled in 1987, Hope returned to Madison and reconnected with Lori and Tony. Like her friends, Hope began self-harming at 15. Tony Lawrence, born February 14, 1976 in Madison, had her own tragic story. She was sexually abused by a family member at age 9 and assaulted by a teenage boy when she was 14. Though police issued a restraining order, Tony began therapy but didn't continue. Instead, she followed her friend's lead into self-harm and, by 8th grade, attempted suicide. When Lori, Tony, and Hope arrived at Melinda's house, Melinda showed them a knife and explained her plan to scare Shanda. During the drive to Shanda's house, Melinda vented about her anger toward Shanda, calling her a copycat and blaming her for the troubles in her relationship with Amanda. The girls all agreed that Shanda needed to be taught a lesson. Upon reaching Shanda's house, Hope and Tony went to the door, posing as Amanda's friends and inviting Shanda to go with them to the witch's castle, where Amanda was supposedly waiting. Shanda hesitated, saying her parents were still awake, but agreed to go with them later, around midnight. Melinda was frustrated that the plan had to be delayed, but Hope and Tony convinced her to wait. The group then attended a punk rock concert, but while Lori and Melinda enjoyed the show, Hope and Tony grew bored and ended up having sexual encounters with two boys in Lori's car. Afterward, they returned to Shanda's house around midnight. When they returned, Hope convinced Shanda to come with them, saying Amanda was still waiting at the witch's castle. After a moment of hesitation, Shanda changed her clothes and got into the car, where she came face to face with Melinda, who had been hiding in the back seat. Melinda pulled a knife and began interrogating Shanda about her relationship with Amanda. The group drove toward the witch's castle, a creepy, run-down stone structure on a desolate hill by the Ohio River. As they neared the site, Melinda told Shanda about a local legend in which 9 witches had once lived in the castle and were burned alive by the townspeople. Melinda warned that Shanda's ghost might be the next to haunt the place. When they arrived, the girls forced Shanda out of the car and dragged her into the castle while she cried. They tied her up and began tormenting her. Melinda took Shanda's jewelry and distributed it among the girls, while Hope mocked Shanda, dancing to the ticking of her Mickey Mouse watch. Lori set fire to a shirt as they continued to taunt their victim. Fearing they might be seen by passing cars, the group decided to relocate. Lori suggested a garbage dump in a more secluded area. By this time, Tony and Hope were growing uncomfortable and refused to leave the car. Melinda and Lori, however, continued their attack. They forced Shanda to undress and brutally beat her. Melinda repeatedly kneed Shanda in the face, causing her braces to cut into her lips. Despite Shanda's attempts to fight back, the girls overpowered her. Melinda then tried to slit Shanda's throat, but the knife was too dull. When Shanda continued to struggle, Hope got out of the car to help restrain her. Together, Melinda and Lori took turns stabbing her and beating her with a metal rod. After tying a rope around Shanda's neck and choking her until she lost consciousness, they threw her into the car's trunk, believing she was dead. The girls returned to Lori's house, where they cleaned themselves up and drank sodas. Suddenly, they heard Shanda's screams coming from the trunk. Realizing she was still alive, Lori grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her for 2 minutes before returning inside, now covered in blood. She showered and, as if nothing had happened, read her friends' fortunes. Later, Lori and Melinda took another drive with Shanda still in the trunk. Again, they heard her cries. When they opened the trunk, they saw Shanda, barely alive, sitting up and covered in blood. Though she tried to speak, she couldn't, but her eyes rolled back in a horrifying sight. Frustrated that Shanda still hadn't died, Lori grabbed the same iron rod they had used earlier and began hitting her until she lost consciousness again. As the sun began to rise, Melinda and Lori returned to Lori's house, where Hope and Tony asked what had happened. Lori, laughing, recounted the events of the night. The noise woke Lori's mother, who started yelling at her, scolding her for staying out so late and questioning why there were so many girls in her room. Lori assured her mother that she would drive all her friends home. Once they were back in the car, the group stopped at a gas station. There they filled up the tank and bought a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. But it wasn't for drinking. Lori emptied the bottle and refilled it with gasoline. The crime was about to reach its conclusion. They drove to a secluded area and opened the trunk to check on Shanda, who, to their surprise, was still alive. Melinda taunted her rival, saying, "You don't look so sexy now, do you?" Lori and Hope then wrapped Shanda in a blanket and drove her to a remote spot called Lemon Road. Hope doused her in gasoline from the bottle, and they watched as her body caught fire. Still fearing that Shanda might somehow survive, Melinda wanted to be certain this time. She returned with more gasoline, and Shanda's body burned one final time. In total, they had tortured her for nearly 10 hours. Afterward, at around 9:30 a.m., the four girls, now murderers, stopped at a McDonald's for breakfast. There, they made fun of a sausage patty, comparing it to Shanda's burned body after the brutal attacks. Lori then dropped off Tony and Hope at their homes before returning to hers with Melinda, who helped clean the car with a hose. It wasn't until 3 p.m. that Melinda finally went home, completely drained from the ordeal. She immediately called her ex-girlfriend, Amanda, and bragged about what had happened. Amanda didn't believe her and downplayed the situation. Later, Melinda told another friend, Crystal, about the murder and even took her and Lori to pick up Amanda to show her the blood-stained trunk. Melinda convinced Amanda not to go to the authorities, sealing her silence with a kiss, hoping to pass off the murder as a twisted act of true love. Meanwhile, that same morning, Shanda's father realized his daughter was missing. After calling neighbors and friends, he contacted his ex-wife, and by 1:45 p.m., the couple arrived at the Clark County Sheriff's Office to report Shanda's disappearance. What they didn't know was that earlier that morning someone had come across a gruesome sight. As they drove to the Jefferson Proving Ground to hunt quail, they noticed a strange object by the side of the road. Initially, they thought it was a discarded mannequin, but when they got out of their vehicle, they discovered the charred body of a girl. They quickly called the police, who arrived at 10:55 a.m. The officers observed that the body had been deliberately positioned and that the face and hands had been severely burned, likely in an attempt to make the victim unrecognizable. The police began collecting forensic evidence, initially suspecting that the crime might have been drug-related. They didn't think locals, let alone 4 teenage girls, could have committed such a crime. However, the truth would soon be revealed. That same afternoon, Tony and Hope could no longer bear the weight of their secret. They confessed everything to their parents, and by 8:20 p.m., they were at the police station giving a full account of the horrific events, including the names of the other 2 involved. They were immediately placed under arrest. Detectives quickly connected the dots. The missing girl reported earlier in the day had to be the same victim that Tony, Hope, and their friends had killed. The police went to Shanda's home to collect her dental records, which confirmed that the body found by the roadside was indeed hers. Melinda and Lori were arrested on January 12th. Mugshots showed a smiling Melinda, seemingly unconcerned about the situation, while Tony appeared anxious, fully aware of the gravity of what they had done. The prosecutor swiftly announced that all 4 girls would be tried as adults, making them eligible for the death penalty. During the trial, forensic experts revealed the horrifying details of the crime. Shanda had been tied up at the wrists and ankles, beaten repeatedly with a blunt object, stabbed in the chest, slashed on her legs, and sexually assaulted with a sharp object. The cause of death was determined to be smoke inhalation and burns. Despite the overwhelming evidence, not everyone viewed the girls as monsters. Teachers from their schools expressed shock, describing Tony and Hope as well-behaved students, some even above average. Lori's former teacher described her as a student with good values and deep religious faith. Classmates simply said the girls were a bit odd and often wore black. The defense attorneys capitalized on these character references, highlighting the troubled backgrounds of each girl. All four had endured physical or sexual abuse at the hands of a parent or another adult. Additionally, Tony, Hope, and Lori had a history of self-harm, while Melinda had the most extensive record of aggressive behavior and mental health issues. Their lawyers argued that the girls' psychological conditions were contributing factors to the violent act. In the end, Lori and Melinda were sentenced to 60 years in prison. Tony received a 20-year sentence, while Hope's sentence was initially 50 years, later reduced to 35 due to a plea agreement. Although they avoided the death penalty, the consequences of their actions would ripple far beyond their prison sentences. During Melinda's testimony, it was revealed that her father, Larry, had abused his wife, daughters, and other children. He was arrested in February 1993 on charges of abuse, sodomy, and sexual assault. Although he was imprisoned for 2 years, most of the charges were eventually dropped due to the statute of limitations, and he was released after pleading guilty to a single charge. In 1998, at the age of 52, Larry committed suicide by stepping in front of a school bus. Tony was the first of the four to be released from prison in 2000. Meanwhile, Shanda's family continued to suffer. Her father, Steve, turned to alcohol after his daughter's murder and died in 2005 from cirrhosis of the liver at the age of 53. He was buried next to Shanda. Shanda's mother, Jackie, tried to move forward and, in April 2006, agreed to donate a dog named Angel to Melinda, who had been working in a canine assistance program training service dogs for people with disabilities. Jackie was harshly criticized for her decision, but she maintained that she wanted something good to come out of the tragedy, believing it was what Shanda would have wanted. In 2012, a documentary titled Charity Scar followed Jackie's journey as she helped Melinda train the dog in Shanda's memory. Despite forgiving Melinda, Jackie remained angry with Amanda, believing that her daughter wouldn't have been killed if not for Melinda's jealousy over Amanda's relationship with Shanda. Jackie also believed Amanda was partially to blame, accusing her of having a sexual relationship with the underage Shanda and knowing about Melinda's intent to kill but doing nothing to stop it. On January 11, 2018, Lori was released from prison, having served nearly 26 years. She completed a year of parole afterward. Melinda was also released in 2019 after serving time in the Indiana Women's Prison, following which she completed a year of probation. The horrific torture and murder of Shanda underscores the cruelty that adolescents can be capable of, but it also highlights the devastating impact of growing up in dysfunctional homes. Had Lori, Melinda, Tony, and Hope not experienced abuse throughout their childhoods, Shanda might still be alive today. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.